My great-grandfather, Jack London, was born in 1876 and died at the age of 40 in 1916. Flora Wellman was born in Massillon, Ohio, in a very prestigious family. She was well educated with private tutors. As a very young child, she lost her own mother and was raised by a stepmother. She had fever as a child, maybe typhoid fever, and lost all her hair, and her stature was stunted as a result of this, and she nearly was blind because of this fever she had. Nevertheless, she was a very plucky young woman, and at the age of 16, she ran away from home. She did live with a sister for a while, but then she spent 10 years. I don't know what she was doing in those 10 years until she arrived in Seattle, where she met William Henry Chaney, who really was the love of her life. They did move to San Francisco, and eventually when Flora became pregnant, she was abandoned by Chaney. Before that abandonment, she and Chaney lectured and appeared in the Common Sense, which was a journal of an intellectual journal of the time devoted to free thinking, and that was edited by the Slocums. When she was abandoned by Chaney, Flora was taken in and taken care of by Amanda Slocum in San Francisco. When Jack was born, it was a very difficult birth, and she did not recover well from it. She may well have been in postpartum depression, and the doctor who attended the birth had also attended the birth of a child of Virginia Prentice, an ex-slave, and he recommended that Virginia nurse the baby Jack. And so that was how the Prentice family came into the life of Jack Chaney, who then later became Jack London. Flora, who was destitute, made beautiful shirts for Alonzo Prentice. And when Joan London, who was on a job with Alonzo Prentice, saw these shirts and admired them, this is how he met Flora Wellman, and the two of them eventually married when Jack was 9 months old. Later through his childhood, he spent a lot of time at the Prentice household and certainly had interaction with the two children of Virginia and Alonzo. Flora is often treated really badly by the biographers, and Jack himself created a lot of myths about his own upbringing, and there's a lot of nonsense about that she didn't love him and that she was cold. And you know, parenting is not inherited, it's learned. And Flora herself did not have her own mother as a role model. There are letters that they had exchanged which express deep appreciation. Jack has an inscription in one of his books that he gave to his mother saying that things will always be good between us. He also had a thimble that he gave to Flora that is inscribed "To Mother with Love." And Flora wrote him a very, very sweet letter when he was being a hobo and traveling around the country, and she was very concerned about him. Sent him $5, which was probably all the money she had to spare at the time, and say, you know, wishing that he were taking good care of himself and that he would come back soon. So there was actually a loving bond between mother and son. But you know, sometimes it's difficult being in that relationship of mother and son. But Jack also had that really close relationship with Virginia Prentice, who he took care of all of his life. Virginia Prentice also became a nurse to Jack's own daughters, Joan and Becky. And at one point, for quite a number of years, Flora Wellman and Jenny Prentice lived together. Flora is also frequently denigrated for teaching Jack to distrust peoples of other races. And I actually find this hard to believe because she could sit down and talk to absolutely anyone. Also, the fact that the racism, if it existed, was never imparted to my grandmother or her sister, would indicate to me that that kind of racial prejudice did not exist in the Wellman family. In fact, in the early writings with the Common Sense, it was a journal which was, as my grandmother, or as it was called in the era, and I use quotes around this, it was a journal of free thinking. It was pro-Negro, pro-women, pro-Grange. There's also assertions that Flora ruined the family financially, flitting from one endeavor to another. And it could be looked on that way, I suppose, but I think of her as a very enterprising woman who was trying her hardest to make a better life for her family. The whole issue of Jack's paternity has been sort of a mystery, and my family has always considered William Henry Chaney to be Jack's father. My grandmother believed that because her father told her that he believed his mother, essentially. When Jack wrote to Chaney, they exchanged letters, and Chaney did deny his paternity, and he claimed that he was impotent at the time. Now, there has been some recent research done by Professor Whitmore, which we heard at the symposium here in Berkeley in 2014, and he has tracked down the fact that a prior marriage of William Henry Chaney produced 3 children. What? There have been myths around the paternity of Jack London. My grandmother was told by her father, Jack, that he believed his mother, Flora Wellman, who asserted always that Chaney was Jack's father. He was raised under a myth that Joan London was his father, but when he asked Flora directly, she told him the truth. Joan London did provide a name to Jack, but the family, the Shepherd family, Eliza Shepherd was 8 or 9 years old when her dad married Jack's mom. She knew the truth, but she did not impart that truth to her children. And that family pretended for many years, and some of them, I believe, still think that they are blood relations of Jack London. There are scholars who have tried to make that connection, they've tried to validate that connection, although in more recent years that has been laid aside, and the truth of the paternity has been, the assertion is that Chaney is the probable father. Now that Professor Whitmore has revealed the fact that William Henry Chaney fathered 3 other children by a prior marriage, it makes for a stronger case of Chaney's paternity. In the Irving Stone collection at the Bancroft Library, there is a letter from Irving Stone to Eliza Shepherd, where he says that it is common knowledge in Massillon, Ohio, where Flora was from, that William Henry Chaney was the father. And this was one of the reasons why Stone's biography was changed to say a fictionalized biography, that that family did not want the paternity issue to be revealed. There was a letter, I guess it was Charmian and Eliza Shepherd were the people who objected at that time. And the letter that, I don't have Eliza's letter, I've not seen that, but the letter that Stone wrote was to Eliza, and he said there's no point in denying this, it's common knowledge in the hometown of Flora. So on the side of the Shepherds, well, they were the ones who inherited the estate. Jack's daughters were not inheritors of his estate. They never received they received a small stipend until they were 21. But they did not receive his royalties or any of his estate. My father was the grandson of Jack London. Sunday, November 11, 2018. Jack London Historic State Park. Sunday, I brought my own pop-up exhibit in honor of my grandmother, Joan London, and her sister, Becky London. Jack London's daughters had no visible presence in the refreshed museum. I only saw that they were mentioned on a timeline. I know that my grandmother, Joan, and Charmian did have a correspondence, and they became friends of a sort. Joan did go on to write her own biography of her dad, Jack London, in his times, in the 30s. She got the cooperation of Charmian to see the material at the Huntington, but as far as I can tell, it was the business correspondence, not his personal correspondence, that she was allowed to look at. The Charmian first, and then the Shepherd family controlled access to Jack's materials at the Huntington Library for many, many years. You couldn't go in and look at the material without their permission. I think that she did follow in his footsteps philosophically, and she made her own way as an intellectual by lecturing, by writing. She was quite an accomplished woman. She later became a secretary and librarian for the California Federation of Labor. And she also wrote a book about the farm workers in the 60s, the California farm workers movement, called So Shall Ye Reap, which she co-authored with Henry Anderson. And on her death, she was eulogized by the California State Legislature as a heroine of labor. I'm not saying it right, but they gave her great honor upon her death. I was a child during the free speech movement. We spent many of our younger years on various causes, on the picket lines or marches, from everything from civil rights to the farm worker movement to Hiroshima Day protests, the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. Those were all issues that I was raised on the battlefront with. I don't think that Jack was a racist. And I think that he used the popular... He tried so hard to earn money to do his various projects that he did use stereotypes from his time. And I think in his heart, he didn't buy into that. I think he was so close to the Prentice family that Virginia in many ways was his real mother, emotionally. And he had certainly his writing about women with regards to the Asian women is certainly much more naturalistic than his writing about white women. There is, Clarice Dawes thinks that he actually his first love may have been an African-American woman. And there is also an affair that he had in Hawaii with a Hawaiian woman. So I think it's unlikely that he was a racist. That's my own opinion, just based on family histories. And this is there's another thing that maybe should be looked at, but the house in Massillon where Flora grew up, it is rumored that there is a hidden passageway under that house that could have been used during the time of the Underground Railroad, in which case that was her family home during the Civil War. So that is something to look into, and I haven't gone further with it than that. I don't think he was a true individualist, or I don't think he really believed in that. I mean, everybody's an individual, but the things like the Wolf Larsen, for example, the character in a Sea Wolf, is the strong individualist who does not survive It's the Henry Van Weyden who is more connected to other human beings and more of a human in how he deals with other human beings. He's the one who wins in the end. It's not the individualist. The Martin Eden, who becomes an alienated individualist, kills himself. I think that Jack really believed in the social connection and the necessity of that social connection. In The Call of the Wild, the dog, Buck, the call of love which he has for his master, Thornton, is stronger than the call of the wild. And when Thornton dies, Buck does not go off to become a lone wolf. He joins a wolf pack. It's the pack that ensures his survival. And I think Jack knew that we don't survive without love. We don't survive without other people. You cannot just be an alienated individual and survive. I also don't think Jack committed suicide. He was planning, and the night before he had many plans, but the night before his death, he talked to his sister about his plans for the ranch, where he wanted to have a community for the workers. He wanted a school for their children, a post office. He had a dream with the Wolf House that could be a place where artists and writers could come. It would be sort of like a retreat for artists and writers and intellectuals of his time. He was paternalistic, but I think he had a dream of a utopian community. He wanted to write a utopian novel, and he didn't live long enough to see either of those dreams. He was doing sustainable agriculture. He revitalized the agricultural community up there through his sustainable agriculture. And I think he wanted a utopian community. I think that's what he was working towards. The land that he acquired up there on Sonoma Mountain was played out. It had been overworked, and he, in his travels to Japan and Korea and his extensive reading, he was aware that you could use organic material to regenerate the soil, and he set out precisely to do that. His pig palace, as it is called, was designed very humanely for the pigs and very efficiently to collect the fertilizer, which was used on the ground. And he corresponded with experts at the University of California, the agricultural extension. There are other people who are much better versed at this than I am, but his whole thing was to not use the chemical fertilizers or the chemical pesticides. He was an organic farmer, and by building back the soil, he was starting to create an agrarian dream that is again more in alignment with what people are thinking about today. The legacy is the humanitarian aspect of Jack London, that we have to work really hard to help the underdog, to help equalize society. We can't have this huge disparity between rich and poor. There's enough for everybody, but it has to be shared. There has to be brotherhood. There has to be brotherly love. There has to be a society that's built on something more than greed. And that was his articulation in The Iron Heel. It was his articulation in his wonderful preface to Upton Sinclair's Cry for Justice, which he wrote in 1916, where the call for service is to serve all, not just one. I don't think he was an individualist. He asserted that very, very clearly. That's the legacy, to make a better world. This performance of the Iron Heel that we did at the Jack London Symposium in Berkeley and went quite well. On the one hand, I think he would be really tickled and really pleased, and you know, he'd probably encourage us. On the other hand, when my grandmother was a young teen, she had a very famous, her mother's cousin was Minnie Mattern Fisk, who was a leading actress, stage actress. And Minnie wanted to tutor Joan in acting, and Joan, of course, aspired to a career as an actress. And her father completely discouraged her from going that route. He said, no, you don't want to do that, and you don't want to be a school teacher. So, but I think he would be happy that his message has been conveyed through the generations. Why it's such an important novel is he had many peers who were sort of complacent. They thought, oh, yes, you know, socialism will just naturally arise. You know, it will just come into its own. And the Iron Heel is that warning of that power won't give up without a struggle. They're not going to cede you their money, their power, without a fight, and the fight will be brutality. It will be the suppression of people in a very brutal way. And you can't assume that it's just going to be a peaceful, you know, handing over of power. You got voted in, here you go. No, and we've seen this to be borne out over and over again. It's the history of our era, where people's revolutions are, you know, are repressed. And we saw it in Chile, and with Salvador Allende and the military coup that squashed that democratically elected socialist leader. So it's, you know, it's a constant, it's something that we have to be constantly reminded of. And, you know, the whole thing with the militarization of the police in the United States today, that was part of what he was talking about in his book. It's, you know, it's so predictory. Every time I read it, it's clearer to me how much it has to do with our era. What is the legacy of Jack London? It is not exactly the blood which runs through the veins of his descendants. You do not have to be a relative to be an inheritor. It is the birthright of all human beings. It is social conscience. It is the love of humanity. It is the enduring belief that a better world is possible, though it may take generations to achieve. A world without greed, oppression, hunger, or war. A world where the brotherhood of man will be realized, where equality and social justice will prevail. This is the message of the Iron Heel, and it was reiterated in 1915, the year before his death, when Jack London wrote these words. It is so simple a remedy, merely service. Not one ignoble thought or act is demanded of any one of all men and women in the world to make fair the world. The call is for nobility of thinking, nobility of doing. The call is for service, and such is the wholesomeness of it, that he who serves all best serves himself.
Jack London was the most popular, most highly paid, and most controversial author in the world.
He was also a frontier writer, and he kind of embodied this kind of folk image that I think people around the world associate with a kind of American idealism.
He was a romantic figure for people. They found that he was not only good-looking and charismatic, but his life of adventure was very appealing to people, very attractive.
Charmian and I went on a cruise on another boat around the island of Maleta. The natives we encountered, men and women, go stark naked and are armed with bows, arrows, spears, tomahawks, war clubs, and rifles.
He was a socialist, he was a political radical.
The capitalist class has not only not made the best of its management, but made the worst of it. The revolution is here now. Stop it. Who can?
He used overseas assignments to escape woman troubles. He had a series of troubles with women, and he was very adept at escaping them, I have to say.
If you wish to compliment me, call me the Jack London of the British Isles. George Bernard Shaw, Dallas Times Herald, 1905. I wanted to be a two-fisted Jack London He-Man sailor to knock 'em cold and eat 'em alive. Eugene O'Neill, playwright. I would rather be ashes than dust. I would rather that my spark should burn out in a brilliant blaze than it should be stifled by dry rot. I would rather be a superb meteor, every atom of me in magnificent glow, than a sleepy and permanent planet. The function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. Jack London died at the age of 40.